Hello everybody, thank you once again for viewing my channel. Please subscribe, tell all your friends to subscribe to keep updated on the latest and greatest news and reviews in the entertainment world. This is going to be part 2 of my review for the movie Playing for Keeps. I know that this is delayed a little bit, but yeah, so I was kind of backlogged a little bit. But anyway, this movie starring Gerard Butler and Jessica Biel, Catherine Zeta-Jones, Dennis Quaid, Uma Thurman. There's quite a few big stars in this movie. It's a romantic comedy, and basically Gerard Butler plays a guy by the name of George who is a former Major League Soccer player. He gets a career-ending injury, and so he was playing soccer overseas. But then he moved to Virginia to be closer to his son Lewis, and obviously that's where his ex-wife Stacy, played by Jessica Biel, that's where she lives, and so anyway, George, he's unemployed. He's making sports broadcasting audition tapes because he wants to get a job in sports broadcasting, and he goes to Lewis is on the soccer team, the kids soccer team, and George is at one of Lewis's soccer practices, and the coach really isn't paying attention to the kids or what they're doing because the coach is always on his cell phone, and George notices this, so he starts giving pointers to the kids, teaching them how to shoot a goal, basically how to kick the soccer ball. The kids love this, so all the parents want George to coach them. So George reluctantly agrees. Since George is kind of like a handsome guy, and he's kind of single, pretty much. Well, he is single because he had divorced Stacy, his ex-wife. All of the soccer moms are pretty much flirting with him, and throwing themselves at him and whatnot. So anyway, Carl King is played by Dennis Quaid. He is actually he plays the father of a soccer player, and he kind of pays off George or gives George an envelope full of money so his son can play goalie. And he also says that it's for uniforms and whatnot. But the feeling I get from as far as Carl's character goes is he'll do a bunch of stuff for you, but then kind of act like your best friend, but he'll kind of stab you in the back when he is given the opportunity. So anyway, Carl's a very rich guy, and he lets George borrow his Ferrari. And so George, one day, Carl calls George to bail him out of jail because he had gotten into a fight with another guy because he thought that somebody was trying to hook up with his wife named Patty, played by Uma Thurman, by the way. And he asked George to go to his house to pick up $10,000 to bail him out of jail. And George goes to Carl's house, and Patty, George's wife, is kind of coming on to George, but George didn't have the time because he had to go to a soccer game. They had a soccer game that day. So anyway, Carl was delaying George, which caused George and Lewis, George's son, to miss the soccer game. So to kind of make up for it, George lets Lewis drive the Ferrari that he's driving. So anyway, I had notes, but so Denise, played by Catherine Zeta-Jones, was a former sportscaster. She's also a soccer mom, and she actually tells George that his audition tape looks good, but they go to a studio to kind of make it look a little more professional because ESPN was looking for sports broadcasters. So they go to a studio and make a more professional audition tape. And basically, Denise and George sleep together in the studio. And then later on that night, Carl's wife, Patty, is at George's house in his bed, And, obviously George didn't, want any part of this, so he tells her to leave, and she finally leaves. And so, a little later on in the movie, Denise calls George, and she's like, I have some good news for you. And she honks her horn of the car, and it turns out that she's right outside George's house. So George goes outside to find out what Denise has to say. Denise says that ESPN liked his audition tape, and they want him to come out and, see what he's got. So after that, Denise wanted to sleep with George, but George um, actually had Lewis with him, so this is kind of the point where George is kind of changing his ways and whatnot. So George goes out to ESPN Studios, and kind of shows ESPN what they had or what he's got, and he actually gets the job. So he goes and tells Stacy, his ex-wife, that he's got the job, and he wants him and Lewis to move out to Connecticut with him, because it was kind of apparent a little early in the movie that Stacy still had feelings for George. They still had feelings for each other. So Stacy was actually in the bridal shop at the time George had told her about wanting to move, them to Connecticut to experience all Connecticut has to offer. Stacy started crying. She thought about it for a while, and then so she kissed George, gave him a hug. So at this point, we kind of assumed that she had agreed to move out to Connecticut with Lewis to be with George. And so the final soccer game, Carl hands George an envelope, which is actually, what is contained in the envelope is pictures of Carl's wife and George the night that Carl's wife was at George's house. And Carl had assumed that George had slept with her, but of course we all know that he did not. So they kind of get into a little bit of a scuffle, and pictures get scattered all over the ground. And Stacy walks over to George to see what's going on, and she sees the pictures, so she assumes that George slept with Patty. And so she's like, good luck in Connecticut. So at that point, George says his goodbye to Lewis, and then as he leaves, Stacy reveals to Matt, which is her fiance, who she was supposed to marry. She reveals to Matt that she had always loved George, and Matt already had a hunch anyway. So later on in the movie, it kind of shows George pulling over to the side of the road. He stops, he thinks for a while, and then he turns back around to head back to Virginia. So he arrives back to Stacy's house, and he tells Stacy that he did not take the job. And Stacy says that she had canceled the wedding, and so we can assume that they're together. So George actually gets a sports broadcasting job at the local TV station called the Chip and George Show, and so that's kind of funny. But overall, this is definitely your typical romantic comedy. There's really not anything new here. If you like the kind of set formula of these types of movies, cool. But if not, if you're kind of like me, that you're kind of you want something else out of it. I mean, basically, Stacy, throughout the whole movie, it didn't appear that she really had a job. So, why did George have to compromise and not take his job at ESPN and come back to Stacy? I would have liked to see it end with George in Connecticut, happy with his job, and Stacy going out to Connecticut with Lewis and finding George, and then maybe they end up that way. But that's just my little 2 cents. Playing for keeps. Overall, it's not a great movie, but it's definitely a tolerable movie. I am going to give this overall a 3 out of 5 stars. I'm going to be having a more detailed written review on my website. You can see it down there, my website in the description, www.entertainmentsourcenorthwest.com or entertainmentsourcenw.com. And visit that site for more news and reviews as well. Thank you for watching my channel. Thank you for watching my video. Please subscribe, tell your friends to subscribe, like my video, dislike my video, rate, comments, feedback, whatever. Thank you, and until next time, have a wonderful day.